So while you're thinking about your questions, I want to begin with Hillary, asking her about how she came to the tower, and her experiences, and when, and whatever else you want to share with us about it today.
I first just want to say that I'm not particularly comfortable in front of crowds, so I wish I had a support dog at this moment. This film began a long time ago. My mother had possession, my parents had possession of the second volume, and my mother agreed to leave me the visions because she knew I wanted to make a film about it. So from that, I just, over the years, started collecting material, but it wasn't really until Ilona came that I started to really get to work seriously on the film. And it took me about 5 months to put together. A lot of the photographs in the film are from my father. We had a house next door to the tower that was started as a little cabin that my grandmother built for my father. She had one child, and because the tower and her life with Harry was very secretive, she had built this tower this cabin next door for my father where he had to live. And when he started a family, he and my mother built onto this cabin and made a kind of very rustic summer home. We all have lots of stories in the family about my grandmother. She was quite mysterious. There was the fence in front of the tower, and you had to ring the bell in order to gain entrance. If you saw the black car in front, you were not allowed to go in because that meant Harry was there. As I said, we spent our summers there until she died. And then she willed the tower in our house, well, she willed the tower to my father and mother, but then wanted it to go on to the school. And she believed that the school would carry the legacy on of the tower. And she feared that my generation, that her grandchildren would not. So the irony kind of the story, I think, is that she wrote a letter to my father, which I found recently, explaining why she only gave it to he and my mother, and then wanted it to go on to the school. And the reason being is that the house that her parents had in York, that she had loved so dearly, when her parents died, her two sisters convinced her to sell the house. And it was just a really heartbreak for her. And so she realized how quickly something so special could leave the family. And so because of that, she didn't believe that the family would necessarily, at least my generation, would say that. So it's been a little bit of a piece of irony, because the school that it was given to has used it for staff housing, and it's fallen into disrepair over the 50 years. And now the grandchild is trying to save it. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, sure.
I just have a very straightforward one. I loved what you showed me, because I've read the biography, and I was visualizing things in my mind, but my imagination was nowhere big enough to begin to picture what she actually had made. And I loved your presentation, except I wanted it to be about 2 hours longer. So I wanted to ask, is the film going to grow, and do you have any sense of a timetable for it?
Well, I hope to, in the next couple of years, to put together a 1 hour. And I'll use a lot of this material from the 25-minute piece on it. But I'll have to start fundraising for it as well, so it may be a little bit longer than 2 years, but I hope quickly. Yeah, thank you, though.
Yes. I have a question, it may be too personal, but what is your role in the property now?
My role is visitor. I'm sorry, my role is as visitor.
So you have no ownership or anything with any of the property?
No, my father and mother gave it to the school. All the property and the tower and our old house.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that question, if you don't have ownership and you seek to restore and bring it back to some form of what you would like to see it, how would you be able to do that?
That's a tough question, and it's not quite unfolded for us yet. We have been talking with the school. We requested that they don't use it for housing for faculty. They said they would be happy to oblige, and if we built housing for faculty, which costs, they said, about $400,000 or $500,000 currently, they would relinquish the tower to us, and then we could just maintain it and do whatever we would like to do with it. Now that's a large sum, and clearly today is the beginning of something. I don't know if we will ever get to that place. The other possibility would be if they indeed be willing to work with us, then we would promise to help maintain the place and use it for retreats. The school has dormitories. I'm envisioning something that we could hold some meetings there and appreciate the work that is in there, restore it, try to trace the objects and bring them back in. And that would be one possibility, to organize something creative around it, or allow artists to use the space week or 2 or 3 at a time to use for that kind of purpose. I think that would be more in line with what Christiana would appreciate. And those are just a few possibilities. We are also open for suggestions. This is where it's at right now. We are negotiating with the school.
Thank you.
It's a work in progress.
Yes.
I was just wondering, Christiana is being portrayed as, a very private person. But I'm just curious, in her, public life, she was a psychologist and dealt with, clients and patients. And just was wondering, I'm getting back to the value of early childhood education, because that's where things begin. If she had any particular feelings about what she was going through and dealing, but how it could relate also to how children could be raised and brought up in a more meaningful way. It's a very basic, general question.
So you're asking about her,
The way she related and shared her feelings, her ideas, when she was in her clinical work, and if she ever brought any of that into, say, school or dealing with children. I'm just curious. Her public life, but she was working.
I'm not sure if we can answer you that question. Anyone of us?
it's an interesting one.
What?
It's a very interesting question, but I'm not sure who can answer it.
Is the current version of the film available anywhere?
It's actually up on the website now, which is Tower on the Marsh.
Great.
And if you go to About, and you'll just scroll down, you'll see documentary.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
Is there another way of maybe looking at your grandmother's bequeathing the estate to the school as an unintentional, maybe perhaps intentional way of allowing this construction and formation to slip back into the unconscious or the collective unconscious?
I think the question is its answer.
Well, maybe, are we to allow that or not? She had an intention, and you have that in the film, that it should, the very end of the film. Do you remember that quote?
Yeah, the one to my father about,
Yes.
yeah,
They
about
wrote
it,
that
about it
novel.
going on. Right, right. Yeah, I
What
think.
is that quote? Because that might not
Sure, what is that quote? I mean, it basically goes on about that she and Harry created this place, that it was like a book over 40 years of developing the shutters, the carvings, the stained glass, and that there was a need for it to go on.
I just wonder if maybe this is, for yourself and others, a confrontation with the opposition between public and private. Your grandmother being very private, now trying to bring it to the larger community, making it more public. So what you're struggling with is this sort of contest between these sort of opposing principles.
May I ask a question? What do you understand her to have meant by your generation?
Yeah.
That it was not going to care for this properly or appreciate it, or that it ought to be some of the custodian of the tower and the property? I mean, it could have been willed to you. You
Right,
could have,
right.
it looks as if you could have, I mean, the Shaker Village that's up there in the Berkshires and all of that, at some point, there were about 2 or 3 little old ladies left there, and they didn't know what to do with the Shaker Village. And there was a bunch of hippies up there who wanted to take it over and run it as a commune. And then the Mellon Foundation stepped in and saved it as a kind of working museum up there. And so that's a kind of comparable property in Massachusetts where somebody was able to save it, restore it, maintain it, and continue it.
Right, right.
It's a different kind of thing. It's not that level of an operation, but I'm just wondering what your feelings are about it, because it looks as if you really care.
Well, yeah, I do, and I think that what's left now of my family, my parents are both dead and my brother have passed away, but my sisters and I think what's interesting is that it very sadly dissolved my family in many ways. My cousins, both grandmothers, I have lots of family up in Newburyport that we would all spend Christmases and summers with. But when the property left my family, we all dispersed all over the country, in large part because of it. So I don't think she kind of understood that consequence. I think if it had been left to us, we would have used it as a place to gather as a family and to go back and to see the larger family as well. And I think that we would have, my mother was a psychologist, and I think my dream over the years has been for it to be a Jungian retreat, that people could come, they were Jungians, and write letters, do research. You know, whether it's something as public as a museum, that may be a wonderful thing as well. I just think it definitely needs to be shared with the wider world. I think it was her intention, and I think it's a really extraordinary and special place. So, yeah, that's my hope. And I've gone back over the years, like every 7 or 8 years, to visit it and to see just how it's doing. Yeah.
I was curious about if you know anything more about your grandmother's relationship with this carpenter that helped her for so long over these years, because it seemed to me that a lot of the evolution of the building and the construction and her own artistic evolution was dependent on this fellow's input. So I found that relationship, though it was even just hinted at in the movie, to be very interesting. Right.
Well, in the researching of this film, I discovered that she actually was here. I mean, I know she lived in New York, but she was at the artist student league here and studied art, which I had never known growing up. So I think that the tower and her relationship with Kenneth Knight was very special in that they, that he taught her how to use the tools, as his son was very eloquent in saying. And I think that the sense of being very private, quiet, people that enjoyed the solitude, that they had that in common too. And I think from her coming from this kind of Boston Brahmin family and having a relationship with a man who was very much more grounded to the earth and wood and materials and life was just a very profound one for her. They had a very special relationship. I found letters that she wrote to him that they have back and forth, and also his son passed on and gave me some letters that they had written. And there was even one that she wrote to Kenneth Knight's wife after she heard that he had died, and she expressed how sorry she was that she hadn't seen him before he died, because it was a very special relationship. Yeah, and he would come back over the years. And David, the son, has lots of fun stories of him and his cousins coming. He has this great one about after the dynamite went off, he went down to the river and saw this huge black snake in the path, which I thought was quite interesting because all my summers I never saw snakes there, so I was curious to the symbolism of that. Yeah, the synchronicity. And there are just many stories. There are stories about Kenneth Knight building secret compartments in the tower, which I'm not sure anybody has found. But there's a lot of mystery to the place, and also humor. The school next door, I guess it was kind of off limits to a lot of the students, but also my grandmother mostly spent her time in Cambridge living during the colder months. And she would oftentimes come back and find the house broken into and things stolen. So, but one of the funny stories I remember hearing from it was that down in the wine cellar, she would occasionally find that, it was at that point just an all-boys school, she would find wine taken. So one day she left a little note saying that one of the wines, that there was poison in one of the wines. So beware, there's one of the wines has poison. And when she got back, she found a little note saying, beware, now 2 of the wine bottles have poison. So, they had a little fun with each other. Yes.
The gentleman on the far right, did I understand you correctly? You alluded to her having had some sort of surgery that was injurious to her. Is that correct?
Yes, at the end of her life, she was symptomatic for a number of ways, and so there was a radical procedure that was used back in those days, which was severing of the Amram's nerve. It was a way to try to control some of the symptoms.
Symptoms of what?
That were part of her high blood pressure and headaches, and you might know more.
Yeah, it was mostly the high blood pressure.
Yeah.
In those days, they had no medication to control the high blood pressure, so they severed the nerves down the spine. And it made her have a lot of fainting spells and become pretty weak.
And this had no psychological implication for depression or?
The possibility for all of that, is inherent in the story. We can't say after the fact. To me, just the image of that move, because part of the way it's like there's an image about trusting the school, right, versus trusting Mr. Knight is a great counterpoint, where she trusted him and he helped bring her vision into the world. So her deference to opinions outside of her, is one of the themes that I picked up in reading about her working on. So her trusting that medical team that actually thought that was a good idea hurt her. Right? And it hurt her in a way that she could not have foreseen. And it's because, to me, part of it is that she was metabolizing so much in her body that, the symptoms to me were part of that metabolic process. And so to then injure that very thing, very much in the image of the autonomous nerve, just goes right to the heart of that, is that she was going to be handicapped in terms of the way in which she was going to process things. But at a deep level, at the psycho level. So.
Sam?
Yeah, Claire Douglas in her biography does not portray Harry Murray very well. He comes off almost as the villain in parts of the book. And I'm wondering what other people's perspective on him is. He seems to have been unable to consummate the relationship in the way that she wanted it to be. He gives several different stories about her death. Maybe Michael, you can comment on that, or Hillary, you can comment on it. I'm just curious as to how others have viewed him, because maybe I'm getting a biased view from the biography.
I don't have any grand theory about that. To me, he's a bit of an enigma. He always strikes me as, in those pictures of him and seeing him at the New York Public Library, as a rather cold person. But there's an enormous amount of evidence, the people who worked with him at the Harvard Psychological Clinic over the years, both women and men, that they were inspired by him and excited by him, and that they accomplished a great amount of work because of his personality. He had some kind of charisma or aura or charm, and this must have been a real thing. He was a ladies' man in some sense, but he was also kind of a man's man, not as a macho guy, but I mean, a lot of men, young men, responded to him in a way and are very grateful to his inspiration. So there's all of that, but he's also, as I was trying to say, he seemed to be, there was never an obscure, big polysyllabic word that Henry Murray didn't like and use. And one could say, in a certain sense, he really wasn't a very good writer. He managed to write this book called Explorations in Personality, but when you look at that book, it's really, there's a whole lot of other contributors and other people in there collaborating and things, and you wouldn't say that's Henry's book. He wrote this enormous introduction to the Hendricks House edition of Melville's novel Pierre. It's almost as many words as the novel itself in some way. It's kind of bizarrely overblown. That's almost like that was he couldn't write the big book on Moby Dick and on Melville, so kind of that was how he had to stick it in there. Other people came along, Lewis Mumford, other people wrote biographies and things about Melville. They were friends of Murray's and Christiana's. They would get something done. But I don't know, Harry was always chasing the white whale, and he wasn't really content. If he didn't get the white whale, he couldn't get a smaller fish, and he didn't end up just doing a minnow, but he was accomplished in many ways. But I don't know, he wasn't an individual person who did the great work, and I think he was dismayed and somewhat disturbed probably that he didn't pull that off.
Well, Claire Douglas suggests that he wanted, Christiana to be his muse, and that he blamed her because she failed in that project, particularly when he was trying to write his book on Melville.
Well, he blamed a lot of other people. He blamed other people like Jay Lida. I met Jay Lida once, when I was a graduate student at the university, a great filmmaker of Serge Eisenstein. I mean, he wrote a book on that cinema and all that sort of thing. A great Canadian professor, and he visited down there. He decided that I was the hunting inspector. That's in some article he wrote. He gave me that nickname because I was looking for sexual symbolism in Moby Dick, you see, at that time. So, I mean, I met some of these characters. They were sort of great figures in some way, great academics, and And Lida compiled the Melville log in 2 volumes. It's every scrap of paper and everything you could ever imagine of having any kind of tangential relationship to Melville. Well, Murray was incredibly upset, you see, when any one of these people would come along and actually finish something and use some of the materials, or talk to the Metcalf family and be befriended by them, because they were sitting back there, they were quite happy for Harry to do the book, but he just wasn't getting it done over time. And so they would then, somebody else would come along, some younger person, and the person would actually accomplish something. So it's an odd situation there, I mean, in his personality. He's a kind of figure in the midst of all of these other people, and they're doing all of these kind of interesting things, and they all seem to, I mean, I don't think it's just that, I mean, I read that thing about the death of Christiana, and it looks odd to me. It's not quite Chappaquiddick or something like that, but you know, there are these moments when people find themselves in a circumstance, and then they maybe are concocting something that's not quite exactly the thing, you see, because the magnitude of what has happened is so impactful that they can't stand it. And I have some suspicions like that, but I just had this very little moment with Harry Murray, and I couldn't say anything definitive about him. Those are just my feelings as I've worked through this material. You actually have a whole lot more to say about that personally, don't you? I mean,
Yeah, my family does too. Yeah, I'm not here to say. So, let's see, where do I start? I mean, I think it's interesting that when my grandmother was being analyzed by that he was wary of Harry Murray, and he warned her a little bit about him. That he felt that my grandfather, William Morgan, had much more depth and substance, and you know, that he was a man that in some ways she should be with. And yet he also supported the triangle. But Harry was, as you say, I think he was a wonderful inspirer. He was very charismatic. He was able to really be quite inspiring to students and to lead people in great quests, as he did at the Harvard Psychological Clinic. I think that in many ways, though, he was a disappointment. And I tried when I started this film, and still in many ways trying to keep an open mind about him, because my family felt very conflicted about him. I think one of the ways that it was hardest for my family was that Harry always promised my grandmother he was going to marry her. And she was always waiting for his first wife to die. And then when she did die, he still did not marry her. And his affairs continued. And in fact, when she did die, on their vacation together, he, I believe, was breaking news that he was starting a relationship with his then second wife. Which is leading me to her death, which I don't need to go into. But as a child, firsthand, I mean, I have lots of stories about Harry, but one of them was when I was around 10, I was, like a lot of young girls, really into horses. And I always had my birthdays there, because my birthday's in August, and we always had it in my grandmother's garden, and the whole family, all the cousins and everyone would come. And Harry promised me that he would bring me a horse. So I was very excited for that birthday, and when it did come, he woke me up early in the morning and told me that he didn't have the horse for me. And it was just a little piece of my own personal experience of how, you know, he was a man of great promise but never followed through. So, not that I could have had a horse before I lived in New Jersey, but yet the promise was there, so anyway.
Just one final comment on this question, and then we close for our lunch. I also see it as Harry and Christiana he would be the extrovert to her introversion, and they made a perfect coupling in that sense. You refer to Jung's opinion warning her about Harry being psychologically not as mature as she was. Regardless, they had a great life together. They did accomplish a lot together. They were not perfect human beings. They both had other relationships, not just Harry, but Christiana continued on. And I don't want to talk about the death because that's too mysterious. Just to add Claire Douglas's opinion about the couple and Harry in particular, and this is where we come to our projections. I think Claire projects a lot of her own relationship with Selinger onto this couple, and that may be her story. I view the couple somewhat differently. I think they were the primary lovers for life, and they really tried to accomplish something that they thought was important. That's what I tried to emphasize in my piece, and I also know that we are all the wise men who are looking at that elephant, and we are all seeing something, and we're trying to piece together the creature. I think that's what we are trying to do. But just about Claire's view, I think she's much influenced by her own story. Okay, and let's break for lunch, and see you back together for the next film and more talks and conversations. Thank you.